Welcome everybody to our webinar number 3 of our series entitled 10 Stages Human Rights from History to Action. And tonight we will focus on a potent weapon that is dehumanization. It strips away dignity, paves the way for violence, and fuels atrocities. We will discuss dehumanization and how it operates from hate speech to systemic violence, and crucially, how we can recognize it and resist it. And we are honored to be joined tonight by two fantastic experts whose bios are rich. So in a nutshell and in a chronological order, let me introduce Mirjam Karoly, who is a political scientist and an advocate for Roma rights, a member of the Austrian delegation to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, who currently works at the Wiener Wiesenthal Institute. And our second guest is Dr. Joanna Talewicz, who is an anthropologist and an award-winning expert in Romani studies, social inclusion, and minority rights. She's also the co-founder and president of the famed Foundation Towards Dialogue. Joanna is also an author of numerous publications, a public speaker, and a dedicated advocate for human rights. Now, what's really important is that our discussion is grounded in Professor Gregory Stanton's 10 Stages of Genocide theory, and is directly linked to the 10 Stages educational app designed by Humanity in Action Poland. And this application is the first educational app of this kind, which is available for free to anyone in 3 languages, Polish, English, and German. And our series, the webinar series, is supported by Google Poland and received patronage from Babka Histe and NGO.pl. This webinar will also be recorded like the previous ones, so it will be available for viewing later on our Humanity in Action Poland Facebook page. And to recap, the 10 stages of genocide are classified as classification, symbolization, discrimination, dehumanization, organization, polarization, preparation, persecution, extermination, and denial. We have already discussed classification, symbolization, and discrimination, and are now putting in the spotlight the 4th stage, dehumanization. And my first question is to Joanna. Our Humanity in Action Poland 10 Stages app clearly illustrates how discrimination is not just an isolated event, but rather a planned and chilling progression, often rooted in stereotypes and exclusion. And I'm curious, drawing on your very rich advocacy experience in Poland and beyond, how acutely do you observe this process unfolding today? And I'm particularly interested in the Roma community experiences.
First of all, hello everyone, and I would like to thank you for the invitation, also introduction, and the work you've been doing, because I think it's a very important topic, especially in the present time, that we are talking about the genocide, not in the context of one final act, but as a longer process. And as you said, dehumanization is one of the steps. And dehumanization is also, never just one act. It's also process, and it often starts with the language, as you mentioned, with the jokes, stories, sometimes rooted, in or by pop culture, with the stereotypes that reduce people to cliches. In the case of Roma communities actually in Poland, and not only in Poland, but also across Europe, we see this very clearly. Roma people are still often described not as citizens with the full rights and histories and culture, but as a problem which needs to be solved or a challenge for the system. That kind of framing leads to acceptance of inequality and then discrimination, which is normalized. And this is also a situation which we observe in Poland, unfortunately. This dehumanization doesn't stop at language. It translates. It also translates into unequal access to, for example, education, healthcare, housing, and a lack of institutional response to violence, physical violence as well. We've seen many cases where incidents of hate go unpunished simply because they are seen as not that serious. That's how dehumanization becomes systemic. And also, this is our reality.
Thank you, Joanna. And my question, building up on what Joanna already said, I wanted to narrow down my question to education and ask Mirjam a question about education. And as we all know, education is very important way to stop harm from happening. That's why, for instance, at Humanity in Action Poland, we also try to come up with learning tools that would be interesting and engaging for the students. But from your experience, Mirjam, also internationally, could you please share 3 ways or maybe 3 strategies that so far have worked well to help groups that you've cooperated with? Like students, teachers, or local communities to spot the early signs of dehumanization?
Yes, first of all, also thank you to everybody for inviting me and also for the listeners. And yeah, thank you for the discussion. Maybe before I say something on your question, I just want to add what Joanna said. We have just a very recent case here in Austria. I think it fits so much to the topic, where it was very interesting how Roma migrants or actually refugees from Ukraine are framed in one of the counties of Austria in Salzburg, where Roma refugees were portrayed as migrants who commit social fraud and are non-deserving Ukrainian refugees. And it was I think it fits very much into this dehumanization because there was a broadcast done about the topic where also the coordinator for asylum and refugees was speaking, and he himself actually used, I would say, very negative language because he always underlined that they come with big families, that they commit social fraud, that they're not deserving the humanitarian aid they're getting, that they have new passports, which is very interesting. And he even asked the police to check it. It turned out that they're all correct passports. But in fact, now we have a public discourse about refugees and especially those from Ukraine, and to what extent they should receive child allowances. So there might be a change in the legal system for it. And I found very interesting how it was triggered by a very local event. And Roma were used actually in order to get very negative public discourse about it. And now we have this rather broader debate. So I think, how it is also utilized, it's a very interesting point Joanna brought up with. But with regard to teaching, I'm not sure that I would say I have strategies, but I think from the work experience I have had, and I remember very well now a training we have done when I was still working with the OSCE, and we have actually built up for police. We found 3 elements very important for teaching. in a broader sense, human rights-based approaches, and also in order to counter discrimination, stereotypes, and dehumanization. And I would name it like work with facts. Very important is to deconstruct generalized stereotypes. So what do we ask ourselves, what do you know versus what do you believe? What do we really know based on our experiences? What do we have really experienced, rather to hearsay, hearsay, or stories which are, I don't know, spread by news, by whatever, digital sphere and so ever. The second point I would say, or element, is promote ability to change the perspective. And I think this is also a very practical way in teaching or in doing trainings or engaging with students or other people, because it allows people to discover their own limitations and how they would act being in a specific situation. For example, not to take like a pattern out rather than discussing on ethnicity, on culture or whatsoever, but so what is a specific pattern you observe? How would it be? Because often you can translate it into your own situation. And how does it feel for you if you are in this position? To make them, how do I walk in other shoes? How does it feel? Change perspective. And the third point I would say is promote empathy, in a sense of promote the ability to understand and share feelings of another person. And I think that's very important, or that was our reasoning, that it's very important in order to change behavior or to trigger, the reflection about behavior, is to get to the emotions. And I think that's a very crucial element. And here I think it's very important also to use rather personal stories and not these generalized opinions about certain things, but take out the person behind something, not refer to generalized terms, but to look at the human being in a very individual case. And so these are the three elements I think are very important, and I wanted to underline them because I think that when we developed this police training, it was very interesting. We did it together with the police. And the idea was actually to promote safety and security for Roma communities, and to get to the work a policeman have to do, but to also make understand that it should be equally the service to all persons, irrespective any ethnicity or national background. And we saw that there's a lot of bias within the police. And that was also very interesting. So when we developed the training, we, for example, started with asking them, what are biases about the police? So, that they are, and that was kind of a bit, could be sometimes funny, but was also serious. But, then when you see, that there are generalist statements, and then we said, okay, so what do you know about a specific community? And they come up, they could understand or reflect actually, there are simply opinions about certain groups. I think that was very, very effective, actually, a very effective tool. And it opened up also to reflect on own stereotypes and, opinions.
Thank you very much, Mirjam. I think the three strategies that you shared seem like a perfect way, like a perfect reference point to have in a teaching or educational toolbox. The example that you gave with the police, the changing of perspective, mobilizing empathy, but also drawing attention to trying to understand certain patterns seemed to have worked. And you also mentioned the power of the personal stories. And as you know, the 10 Stages mobile app actually highlights those personal stories from the past, which on the one hand, I would say kind of offer a warning sign, but on the other hand, we hope it can become a source of inspiration for taking up action. For instance, the story of Katarzyna Filipek in Stage 4 and Dehumanization. But history isn't just something we look back on. it is unfolding around us, unfortunately. And the Foundation Towards Dialogue has been supporting Roma refugees from Ukraine. And Mirjam, you already mentioned the Ukrainian context as well. And many of those Roma refugees from Ukraine have been found to be facing double and multiple discrimination as refugees and Roma and regarding other identity statuses. So my question now to Joanna, unlike non-Roma refugees, many of those Roma refugees from Ukraine were left in a way left alone to navigate things alone. And what specific challenges did your foundation face in addressing this very unequal and often dramatic treatment? And how did you try to respond to the needs of Roma refugees from Ukraine on the ground?
Thank you for this question, and I would like to also add that situation in Poland, it's very similar to, you know, situation in another country where Roma refugees flee from the, you know, war in Ukraine. As Mirjam said, it's very, very, very similar, but it's even, you know, more complicated because we have a higher number of Roma refugees, and the situation is really complex and challenging. And it's an ongoing process, so it's not something which we finished, but we still have a lot of challenges and situations with, you know, which need to be solved. But yes, as you said, we as a Towards Dialogue Foundation, we support Roma refugees as well. Next to Polish Roma, what is important for us, we also work with Roma. So, you know, members of my team are Roma from both, you know, from Poland and from Ukraine, and this is very important because even if I'm from the community, I'm Roma myself. Very important for me is to know the specific situation of Roma in Ukraine before the war to better understand their situation and their needs. Because people very often see us Roma community in general as a homogenic group. You know, the people don't realize that we are very diverse also in terms of, you know, social situation, but also, you know, dialect of language, you know, culture, and we are diverse in so many levels. So for me, the first challenge was to better understand their situation, because the level of social exclusion and poverty in Ukraine before the war, and I'm talking about the Roma community, was so terrible, and it has an impact on their situation right now. Around 30% of the Ukrainian Roma are stateless in Ukraine. And we must remember that we are talking about quite, you know, big population of Roma. When we compare with the Polish Roma, we have around 30,000 of Romani people in our country. In Ukraine before the war, around, you know, even 500,000, or 100,000 Romani people, which is, you know, confirmed by many reports, for example, by Minority Rights Group report. So it's the scale of the problems are really higher, and from the very beginning of the war, we noticed that Roma refugees were being treated differently than non-Roma people. More suspicion, more rejection, and no often access to the support they needed. And I'm talking about the very basic support, like food, like you know, access to the information. Some were turned away from the shelters as well. So I had a lot of interventions when, you know, I saw mothers with the kids, with the infant, you know, who weren't welcome in collective shelters, and they were in front of the door. And it was March, so you can imagine 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and they, you know, and they were in front of the door. In the same time, you know, Ukrainian people who are non-Roma could go inside and have a, you know, hot tea and, you know, and bed. and a completely different situation. They also had no medical, support, psychological support, and sometimes even toilets. I'm talking about the Roma who spent, for example, 2 weeks at the railway station because there were no place for them. And it was a situation which we confront last year, and it was a very hot summer. So, you can imagine how the situation looks like. For us, was very important to respond, but not only, not just with the emergency and short-term help, but also with advocacy. So we do our best to, build awareness about the situation of Romani people. I also do my best to inform people and politicians, decision makers, that it's not about ethnicity. It's not about that they are Roma, but it's about the social and exclusion and poverty. It's a very difficult and very challenging, and this is how we see, this is when we see how stereotype works, and what does that mean? When we are talking about the generalization and dehumanization, it's as I said in the beginning of my speaking, that it's an ongoing process. So we have not too many Roma than in the beginning of the full scale of the war in Ukraine, but we still have probably a few thousand people, and they have been living in segregated shelters, collective shelters, away from the cities. Kids have, not equal access to the education because we observe disproportion in terms of the level education between, Ukrainian Roma and non-Roma, and we still don't have a right, and adequate response. So it's, as I said before, the situation is very, very complex. And when I observe the language, not only random people who are not educated, it's not about this. It's about, language, which is part of the narrative of local authorities, sometimes government. I'm still asking, I still have the question, why, Romani people from Ukraine, it was a situation which I had months ago, when one person in Polish parliament asked me, why Romani people from Ukraine are so unhappy, you are nomads, so it's never mind where you live, and I was speechless. It's still, people still believe that we are nomads, that we don't care where we live, we don't care about education, we don't care about the labor market. Integration is something which, it's nothing important for us, and it's really not true. And the segregated places and separation, isolation, it's not a right response. And I believe that we as a country, we have better tools, and we know how to work to include these people. But it's really, really, really difficult when we are still perceived as a problem. We became synonym of the social problem. So so it's not only about the humanitarian issue, about their trauma, about the situation of the kids, but also about the violence, about, women, single mothers, and about the segregation, and about, how our, country works. This is very, very, I would say, clear picture, where we are. So yeah, and of course this is also has an impact on Polish Roma, because people, don't understand, as I said before, that we are very diverse, and social exclusion has nothing common in our roots, in our nationality.
Thank you, Anna, for painting this nuanced but, of course, grim picture. As you underlined, there is still a lot of systemic discrimination. And as you rightly pointed out at the beginning of your answer, things are not they are still unfolding. They are not. It's not the end of the stories of refugees from Ukraine in Poland and in other countries. It is still unfolding, and I would say a call to researchers who research the topics on refugee issues and migration. Please do not stop researching those issues, even though it's already a couple of years after the start of the full-fledged invasion. Because we need to document and analyze all the systemic disproportionate discrimination that Joanna mentioned, in order to be able to do informed advocacy on a political and policy levels. And Joanna, also you mentioned this paradox of trying to understand a particular context, let's say the Polish context, but also the broader context, because there are some aspects which are similar in both contexts, but there's also some aspects which are specific. And when developing an educational tool like 10 Stages app, we also had to keep in mind those various levels regarding the context and what does the different contexts do to the content, and how we interpret history. So specifically, when we were designing the app, we collaborated, of course, with the Polish partners, Polish experts, but also experts from Germany and the US and other places, to try to ensure that the app worked across cultural and national contexts. And now I'm turning to you, Mirjam, again, because in your work you have experience both on a national level, but also, for instance, when you served as the head of OSCE office, you also had experience of carrying out initiatives in a more regional contexts. So I'm curious, on the basis of those various experiences, how do you navigate, or how have you navigated the need for the country-specific responses, while also, trying to push or reflect this broader European solidarity, especially in defending minority rights and tackling systemic dehumanization? And if you have a couple of examples, how did you do it in the past? That would be great if you could share them.
Yeah, thank you for this question. It's a very good one. I mean, it's very difficult to say how would you balance. I think both are equally important. I mean, the one doesn't go without the other, or I will maybe try to see why both are very important. In fact, the country-specific approach is important because you have meaningful, targeted, and tailored policy approaches. So in order to meet the needs of a specific locality or country, but then I think you have to even go further down to the local level. It's very important to have a country-based and local approach, because only then it's kind of owned by the people, it meets the interests and the needs of the local stakeholders, and it can be impactful. So that's why we need this local level approach or country level approach. And for European-wide solidarity, it's important because if you have in several countries, for example, you identify a joint problem, an issue, then jointly at European level, you can bring up a very solid legal or policy framework which guides the states, irrespective, and I think that's important, of political interest or political changes. So for the protection of a state or its citizens, and also for the protection of democratic values and principles, it's very important to get a European-wide agenda or even international agenda to which states sign up. And then you have something in place, of course, which can be monitored on an independent level, like we, for example, at the OSCE work, like independent monitoring and also independent giving technical advice to participating states. And this independence was very important because it takes it away from political maneuvering at the local level, what is at the moment or work or what is needed, or, even against, for example, trends as we see now in Europe, that you suddenly have more right-wing governments or conservative right governments who maybe want to bring back the wheel and take away some of the internationally agreed standards in human and minority rights, which we have established since 1945. And I think actually at the moment this is a very risky situation because there are a number of politicians who try to get this down. We see it in the discourse about refugee, which is turned to migrants, and that also the refugee convention should be changed. But also in a broader sense, I think human rights standards we have established in the last 80 years, are in some countries at risk. But since you asked me about an example, I want to give a very general one. Like if we look back, for example, in the last 30 to 40 years, like the change or transition of former Eastern European countries, suddenly we have the situation of Roma in the spotlight of the media, both in Eastern Europe because of a lot of hate violence and racism against Roma communities. And in Western Europe, suddenly it was very instrumental because we had Roma community or Roma coming from Eastern Europe to Western Europe. It was a topic of migration, and they were scapegoated as economic migrants who are background, who are criminals, and so forth. So there was a real reactivation of very negative stereotypes. And back then, it was very interesting because countries didn't know how to respond to this, also not how to protect actually Roma citizens. And so in the late 1990s, actually, several international organizations and also European organizations said we have to do something, and we have to actually acknowledge that we have an issue. We have an issue of anti-Roma racism, and we have to do something seriously about it. And then it was within the OSCE, certain policies were developed, which in 2003 ended up in the OSCE Action Plan on improving the situation of Roma and Sinti in Europe, but also other institutions built up something, especially the Council of Europe has drawn particular interest in the situation of Roma and actually how to work with states in order to bring a proper legal and policy framework in place to address the needs of the people and to counter racism. And in 2005, there was also a specific in regional initiative, which was called the Roma Decade, again, trying to convince governments to do something in the country and in the locality. And then the last bigger initiative was within the European Union back in 2011, which was the EU framework for a national Roma inclusion strategy, meaning there was a European framework, but actually urging national states to commit and do something in order to be more inclusive towards Roma communities, but also at the same time end discrimination and inequality. I think that was actually the main objectives. And so I think it's a very good example because it shows that on international level, something was built up, which is kind of a more policy framework, but then it has to be implemented at the local and national level. So, I mean, the sad story of this, I think, great efforts is that that the changes made, and I would say now in the last 30 years, are not overwhelming, and that it's very obvious that we need more efforts and that more needs to be done. On the other hand, I would say it was a very important step forward because I think it's kind of a mutual learning. There's at some country, in some countries, you develop something, it feeds back to the international level. There are shared experiences. And again, from the international level, which is kind of the guardian of the policies and the legal framework and to see whether things are improving or not improving, it feeds back to the national level. And I would say overall there was also progress made. I mean, this is something we definitely have to see. Let alone all the many actors we have now who are really engaging, even from Roma, but also non-Roma, in order to change things. And I think overall we have to say there was progress as well.
Absolutely. Though, as history shows, progress is never set in stone, meaning that we need to be on the alert and we need to constantly be pushing forward, as well as we can see from the history of various minority groups, it is essential that the group of allies is wider and more proactive. And that's
Maybe
why
I can say one more thing, sorry.
Absolutely.
It was important for me and I forgot, I wanted to mention from this mutual learning, I think what we have seen now that there is some progress, but there needs to be more progress in order to counter racism and also anti-Gypsyism, and then feeds back a bit to our topic, why are specific negative stereotypes or racism against Roma so persistent in our societies? And I think there might be a key for real change.
Absolutely. And building on that, I wanted to ask you, Joanna, because your path is very rich because, as we already mentioned, you blended the social and educational initiatives with research, but also with efforts to impact and engage politicians and authorities. And now with the unquestionably growing anti-human rights movements, polarization, extremism, minority groups such as Roma groups, unfortunately, will be exposed to even more dramatic systemic discrimination and even violence in Poland, in Central Europe, and in other regions. And going back to the topic of allies, I wanted to ask you, on the basis of your experience, how can allies support Roma communities and support Roma advocacy in the present moment?
Oh, I think that it's crucial that that we need to work together to see the social change, to shift also narrative about the migration, minorities, and so on. Because it's not only about the Roma, the negative narrative, it's also about the, other minorities groups. And in our country, it depends, on the time. We had so many attacks towards and against LGBTQ+, against women, and against Muslim people, anti-Semitism, anti-Gypsyism. So we should be together. But this is the story not only about the minority groups, This is the story about all of us. And what I try to do together with my community and with my team is to implement our story, the story of Roma, our narrative, into more global discussion, because we are not, people who are not the part of the Polish society and community. So we try to build awareness that we are part of the country, we are part of the system. And if our situation is better, we all feel better. We all feel more safe. We all feel, sense of belonging, because, we are here. And even if we have, more, walls, and even if our borders will be closed. We are here and we have to do this together. And it's not about separation. It's not about the, separated discussion about the Roma. We are not living in the bubble. We are part of this reality. And we are part of the discussion about the human rights, about democracy, about the Holocaust and other topics. And I think that our, cooperation and how can I say, common belief that we are here together will help us to better understand. And as Mirjam mentioned in the beginning, the empathy, and similarities between us, when you can identify with my story because of your identity, which is in risk, which is discriminated against, will help you to better understand, or to understand how is to walk with my shoes. And we don't want to live in that country where our kids, no matter if they are Roma or non-Roma, they have disabilities, or different, we have so many identities. So we need to build more just system, more inclusive institutions. This is crucial. And for me, it's important to build this awareness that it's something which is for all of us. It's not about Roma rights, it's about the human rights, but it's also about our common safety. It's about, our, well-being and so on. So, as I said, if we have a higher level of poverty of Romani people, we have a higher level of poverty in our country. So, we should confront with this, and we are able to find a solution. We live in Europe. We live in a developed country. We are part of European Union. And I believe that we are able to build the bridges all together, not separated. And of course, we work with the other human rights organization, with the different kind of minority groups. We also, support other minorities because, being allies, it's just the kind who show up when it's not only when it's easy, it's also, when it's, when it's bad, when nobody wants to listen, when the topic is uncomfortable and unpopular, we should be there. We should be here together, especially today when the world often turns away, from injustice. We observe normalization of discrimination, of hate speech, polarization. We ignore what's happening in Gaza right now. Allyship means more than just a word. It's about showing up, using your platform, standing firm even if others are silent. And because human rights aren't, conditional. And dignity, it isn't something, we can apply selectively. And this is something which is really important, especially today.
Absolutely. That was a very powerful and to the point statement. In Humanity in Action, one of the mottos that we try to go by is that the limitus test of any democracy is how it treats its minorities, especially, and it is true in the context, in the light of what you have said, is that minorities and majority populations are kind of like together, and human rights is an overarching approach, value, a given, but something that is a given that should not be undermined. and the value of intersectional and cross-sectoral movements in civil society is essential to actually uphold the values, the democratic values, the human rights values, as you mentioned. And I can see a lot of similarities in how this allyship should be done in practice to what you mentioned in the disability movement. And as an advocate with disability, I can see a similar way of phrasing it and trying to find allies within a very diverse society, Polish society, European society, etc. And Mirjam, going back to you, I wanted to ask you, on the basis of your educational and also international advocacy experience, imagine that you come up across a very stubborn teacher who says, I don't believe in those interactive tools, educational historical tools. I'm not really sure this 10 stages app works. What would you say to such a teacher in order to have them try it out and maybe have them use it in such a way that it actually contributes to identifying and maybe interrupting even some patterns of inclusion before they escalate on the level of school, on the level of, you know, their community, and maybe even more broadly.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would probably say, listen, you have here a very innovative digital tool, which is great in raising awareness, you know, how to detect steps which leads to dehumanization or genocide. I mean, it's very valid now. This year we celebrate 80 years of the end of World War II. We see certain things in Europe which are very concerning. In order to reach to the youth and especially younger students as well, I think we have to move to the digital field, you know, to use more innovative things. You have their personal stories where people can identify. It's quite of broken down in very short things, easy to read in a sense of very understandable, interactive, very important as well. And something also where you can, as a teacher, maybe connect and use it, like you use it, you know, that they have an interest in looking at it, but also then you ask them to research certain things and exchange and so. Yeah, I think it's a very innovative and very, very interesting tool. I was actually wondering how you get it in the classroom, in a sense of what is the network behind to make it available there.
Thank you so much. That was an amazing advertisement of the 10 stages up, but of course it can be extrapolated to other interactive tools that are out there. Thinking about the classroom context and environment, we also developed a website called 10kroków.org, which actually reflects all the content from the app. But the good news is that it is also enriched by some other stories, life stories, and this is an ongoing process. So this is a call to action to people who are listening to us. If you have life histories that you think could be a good match for the app, for the website, which would feed the framework, the theoretical framework of 10 stages app, please get in touch with us, because we are still collecting those stories, trying to document it, but also trying to use those life stories as an entry point to taking action today. And in the app and also on the website, when you look into the various stages, you will see a lot of women. real stories of real women who were extremely brave, proactive, and as Joanna mentioned before, sometimes preempting certain prejudices, sometimes being upstanders in the most violent stages leading to the genocide and even during the genocide. So both of you are also very prominent women change makers. And I was curious, like from your perspective, what would you say are the unique contributions and challenges women face in the critical field of human rights advocacy? And another sub-part of this question is, how do you think we can try to encourage more women, especially from marginalized communities, to kind of assume the role of leaders in this fight against hate and for human dignity? And this is one question for both of you, a two-part question. Maybe Joanna could start.
Yeah, I can start, and I really like this question, because when it comes to women leadership, I see it every single day in my work and also in my daily life. And the leadership of women, especially Roma women, often goes unrecognized, but it's everywhere actually. They are ones fighting for their kids' education, navigating, bureaucracy, building networks of support, often quietly without applause, unfortunately. And of course, when we speak about the, application and the story from the past connected to the work, I always think also about the brave Romani women, as Alfreda Markowska, who is a part of your amazing work. Her story is included, and she was amazing person, and I had a huge privilege to meet her in person. She was a Roma woman, and she lost her family during the mass extermination outside of the camp, and she saved Romani and Jewish kids, around 50 Romani and Jewish kids, and sometimes her story is compared by the story Irena Sendlerova, and sometimes even Romani people called her, our, Romani Irena Sendlerova. It's about Alfreda Markowska, but unfortunately her story is, in the shadow, even if she was recognized by Polish president and awarded, there is, still no educational materials, about her story, about brave Romani people and about brave, Roma women. We are and we were not only victims, so it's I feel that it's a huge gap, but not only connected to the past, but also to the present days. Alfreda Markowska, when I think of that kind of leadership, I think about, brave, grounded, and committed, leadership. So how do we support more of that? I think we need to make a more space to have more similar narrative, because I said before that it's not about lack of that kind of story. It's a lack of visibility of that kind of story. And I think that we should, not just invite women to the table, but actually let them shape the agenda. That means, mentoring, funding, amplifying their voices, and breaking the idea that leadership only looks, on one way, like loud, formal, top down. Leadership can be caring, local, and rooted in life experience, and this is something which we also we also need more that kind of leadership, not definitely no less. So yeah, I think that, you know, we as a foundation, we do a lot to have a better visibility of Romani women today, you know, not only as a part of the history narrative, but also, you know, our leaders today. We have more women in our community who are active in so many different ways, you know. They are activists, you know, researchers, academics, business women, and so on. And we want to have their story more visible, to also show that, you know, similarities, it's something which, you know, is part of the bridges between Roma and non-Roma people. And I think that women leadership might help us to better understand this also positive aspect of our relations, you know, and yes, and to help us to build the bridges between us. Yeah.
Thank you, Mirjam.
This is so nicely said. I can only compliment, but maybe add to what Joanna said, because she mentioned Alfreda Markowska, that and also to your call that, you know, more examples. I want, coming of course from Austria, being Roma myself, also to highlight the story of Ceja Stojka, an Austrian Slovakina who survived Auschwitz-Birkenau. And I think for me, she is a very good role model, or a very powerful example of Roma woman leadership, because not only through her painting and writing, you know, she globally, I think, worked for recognizing the genocide of the Roma in Europe, but also in Austria, her work, and it was really her voice. I mean, she gave voice to Roma in Austria who survived the Second World War and the genocide against Roma, and there were only very few in Austria. It was maybe 10% of Roma, pre-war Roma, who survived. And then they were silenced. There was a denial of the genocide. There was a lot of racism and discrimination. And only in the late 1980s, in 1988, she wrote a book which is called We Live in Secrecy, where she really gave a voice towards the plight of Roma in Austria. First of all, to their sufferings during the Nazi era, but then also the continuation of anti-Gypsyism in post-war Austria. I think she was tremendously important, not only for the recognition of the genocide of the Roma, but also for actually helping that Roma in Austria were recognized as an ethnic minority. She was tirelessly going to schools, talking, you know, publicly, and then she was painting. She made films. She was writing another book, and I think she was extremely inspiring for many Roma around Europe, and especially also for Roma women and girls. Yeah, so I wanted to mention her. I think she would be worthwhile putting her in the 10 stages with a personal life story, because she has also so rich paintings telling about her life experience, which I think is very touching, especially also for the wider audience. With regard to Roma women, I want to comment what Joanna said, and I think we should, I mean, things like this, now we need much more, you know, getting their voices heard. And this is like organizations, I don't know, initiatives, projects, policy bodies, whatever. Take Roma women in, invite them, listen to them, give them space. I think there are many, there are not few. I think also that very many are active. Many are not so famous. Locally, there are extremely many Roma women who really work very engaged, are very professional, are very good, but often they are not brought before the curtain. So my call would be bring them before the curtain.
No more iron curtains when it comes to women leadership. And as you both stressed, not only taking the space, but also owning the space. As Joanna said, shaping the agendas. And also, as you, Mirjam, mentioned, celebrating those people and treating them as role models. It is our like a the lineage of activism, of advocacy. And as Joanna, you rightly said, there are various ways of being an advocate or an activist. One can be a quiet activist, but still an impactful one. And I am very thankful for your time, insightful commentaries, for giving us a nuanced understanding of dehumanization, but also very practical suggestions on how we can be an upstander, on how we can take practical steps to become a better ally, or a more forward-thinking advocate. So I am extremely grateful, and I recommend to all our listeners to take a look at the organizations that both Joanna and Mirjam are a part of, are leading, shaping their other initiatives. There are amazing advocates that you can be inspired by. So please do take your time to look into it, and we will provide various links to their organizations as well. We also will provide the links to the 10 Stages app, which is available in 3 languages, German, English, and Polish. It is available for free for download. And as I mentioned, there's also a website enhanced version of the application, and we will be adding various life stories. The one that you mentioned, Mirjam, we will try to add it as well. And that would be all for tonight. The next meeting will be on the 5th stage, which is called organization.